Good to go. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all and call the meeting to order. This is the Board of Behavioral Sciences meeting on Friday, September 14th, 2018. It is 9:03. We are here at 1747 North Market Boulevard, Sacramento, California, 95834. At this time, I'm going to establish a quorum. Christina, you
Good
call roll
morning.
call. Good morning.
Vika Stout. Here. Christina Wong.
Here.
Alexander Kim.
Here.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach.
Here.
Betty Conley.
Here.
Max Disposti.
Here.
Dr. Leah Brew.
Here.
Dr. Peter Chu.
Here.
Gabriel Lamb.
Here.
And for the record, Deborah Brown and Jonathan Maddox are absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to start by welcoming three new members to the board. We have Vika Stout, Gabriel Lamb, and Alexander Kim right there. And very, very happy to have our new members. And I would like to give them just a moment, maybe starting with Vika Stout, to introduce herself just briefly and let you know where she's from and her role on the board.
So I'm the LMFT member, and I just retired after 40 years in the field and enjoying that with the grandchildren. And I'm from Inyo County, Bishop, California, and now also in Folsom.
Thank you. Mr. Kim.
Good morning. Pleasure to see all of you. Good morning. I am a public member, Alexander Kim, and I'm from Los Angeles, California, born and raised there. And I currently have my own public affairs firm called Three Kings Public Affairs. And I've have 15 years working in the government sector as working for different elected officials, both Democrat and Republican, so nonpartisan. And happy to be on several different nonprofits focusing on various issues such as the environment, social justice, and diversity and inclusion issues. So I'm pleased to serve my experience with you.
Thank you. And Mr. Lamb.
Good morning. My name is Gabriel Lamb, and I am from Calexico, California, in Imperial County. It's super hot. For those of you who have never been there, it's 120 degrees in the summer. I have a small private practice, and I see all kinds of people because we're small. I have to see most people that walk in through the door, and I also lecture for San Diego State University.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and introduce ourselves as we go around the table. Christina Wong, please. Just roll on the board.
Christina Wong, LCSW member.
And we sure move to, well, we kind of, we're going to skip with the people that already.
Gotcha. Christine Whitlisbach, public member.
And I'm Betty Conley, LEP member.
Max Disposti, public member.
Leah Brew, LPCC member.
Peter Chu, public member.
All right, thank you. And are there members of the public who would like to come up and introduce themselves?
Dean Porter, California Association for LPCCs.
Kenneth Edwards, I'm the new Dean Porter.
Yeah.
LPCC.
He dresses sharp. Jan Lee Wong, National Association of Social Workers.
And Robert Mendelson, I'm here representing the Southern California Counseling Center.
Thank you. Thank you. And my mistake, I forgot to introduce our staff. So Christy, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Christy Berger, Regulatory Analyst for the Board.
Roseanne Helms, Legislative Analyst for the Board.
Kim Madsen, Executive Officer for the Board.
Sabina Knight, Legal Counsel.
And Steve Sodergren, Assistant Executive Officer.
Thank you.
And then just briefly, if I may, we have a new probation discipline analyst. You met him briefly, but Jonathan Burke comes to us from the DCA Exec Office. You will be talking a lot with Jonathan in the coming months and years, and his experience. He started with the Board of Psychology, performing a multitude of different tasks at that board, and so we're very happy to have him as part of our team.
Thanks, Kim. I was just reminded to have people speak into the mic, get really close so that we can be heard. Thank you. So we're going to move to our consent calendar, and that is the approval of the February 21st to 22nd, 2018 board meeting minutes, as well as approval of the April 12th, 2018 board meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, go ahead.
Christina? Oh, sorry. Any discussion? Sorry. Public comment?
These minutes were approved at the previous board meeting, and a vote was taken to approve those minutes at the last board meeting. I don't feel that there's a vote needed today to reapprove them.
Oh, wow, excellent.
Okay. I withdraw my motion.
Okay. So let's move on to our board chair report, Kim. That's me.
Yeah. Something happened tonight.
Anybody can tell this is my first time doing this, so I'm still getting the hang of it. So anyone would like, did anyone have any board member activities that they'd like to report? That they engaged in this month or in the past quarter? Anything of interest? No? And we've already welcomed our new board members and recognized the board staff.
No, we haven't.
That's what we're doing now. Okay. I'm getting it.
You're good. You're fine.
So we did want to recognize staff that have been integral to what the board does. Without our hardworking and incredibly competent staff, we wouldn't be able to do our jobs. So we want to recognize people that have spent many years now working for the board. And we're going to start with Ann Glassmoyer, Special Investigator for the Enforcement Unit.
Marlon, do you want to? Thank you. Yeah. Ann is our special investigator, and she works out in the field. Yes.
We don't know how many years.
10 years.
And all of these individuals have been serving the board for 10 years. So thank you for your service. And Cynthia Burnett, Enforcement Analyst. Darlene York, LCSW Licensing Analyst. Gina Kyriazis, Enforcement Analyst. Lori Williams, Personnel Analyst.
Oh, we should, yeah.
Raquel Pena, Enforcement Analyst. And Kim Madsen, Executive Officer. Should we call everyone back up for a picture?
Yeah, we call it.
Yeah, let's get everyone back up for a picture.
Yeah, imagine.
Oh, and then I'll do single pictures. Yeah. Marlon, do you want to stand in for a minute? We can. Okay. Okay, one more. Actually, great. Today he gets a great seal on that. Great. Thank you.
So we're going to move to our next agenda item, and that is presentation by the Department of Consumer Affairs staff. They're going to give us an update. So I would like to thank Ryan Marcroft, the Deputy Director of Legal, Karen Nelson, Board and Bureau Services, and Taylor Schick from Budgets are here to talk about the updates for us. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thank you for having me. I will be addressing the regulation part of it. As the chair indicated, I'm the deputy director of our legal affairs division. Have my hands on a lot of regulations from the department. I know we have a couple of newer members, so just wanted to give a real high-level review of the regulations and the importance of the regulations to the department and to the board. So regulations, as you probably all aware, especially licensee members, are the way that we govern our licensees, our professions, the way that we implement discipline, those types of things. This department is comprised of almost 40 different programs that do regulations. Our process on a high level is you all come up with the concepts for what the regulations, the law should be to govern the licensees. And then concept is worked with your staff in conjunction with legal to put that into actual reg text that then is debated here. And then once perfected and decided upon, staff typically is working up behind the scenes on a lot of the documents that comprise the whole rulemaking file. That's then submitted over into the department for a review and an analysis, legal sufficiency analysis, budget, fiscal analysis. As it goes through the department, it then makes a stop off at the agency that's above the department, the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. Similarly, legal analysis review, a fiscal analysis review. It'll take a stop at the Department of Finance to review, again, fiscal impacts. And then once that's completed, ultimately it lands at the Office of Administrative Law. So that first step before the Office of Administrative Law, what happens immediately there is it's noticed to the public. Public gets an opportunity to comment. Sometimes there are changes that happen to the regulation based on the public comments that we see. And then it will run through that process again, a DCA review, a budgets review, and a finance review sometimes, and then ultimately to the Office of Administrative Law, which is the entity that decides should regs get approved or not get approved. So that's kind of a high-level landscape. I suspect the reason that I'm here is to talk about we had in the department some pretty significant changes in the fall of 2016. Those changes affected the way that we moved and processed regulations. They also impacted to some degree, I think, the timelines for regulations. So wanted to share with you a little bit of that context. And then Ms. Madsen had supplied some particular questions that she wanted addressed. I'm happy to do that too. In 2016, one of the reasons that the department decided to make the change was that, as I just described that process, the file was not going to agency before the public comment period. Usually it went at the tail end after the public comment period for a final signature. The big change that was made was it imposed a kind of a hard rule that all files are going to go to agency before the public comment period, and then again after the public comment period. And consequently, DCA backed into that by increasing the scrutiny and sort of the rigor of the review that we did before it ever gets previewed for the public. The reasons for that, essentially, are this department as a whole had a high percentage of disapproved regulations. So when they made it through all the different steps and finally got to the Office of Administrative Law, the Office of Administrative Law was disapproving them, a good percentage of them. And so that was one of the reasons for the changes, was to basically increase the scrutiny on them before they ever got to that phase. The other one was the department wasn't clearly following the procedure in the state administrative manual that required agency secretary approval of the fiscal forms before they were noticed to the public. So that was sort of the impetus for the change. The goals of the changes: bring DCA back into compliance with that requirement, improve the quality of the regulations that were coming out of the boards and the bureaus in the department, and then ultimately cut down on the number of disapproved regulations. I think the changes have improved quality. Since the September change, there was some steady improvement in the disapproval rate. It went from a almost 22%, 21.8% disapproval rate in the first half of 2017. It plummeted to a 7.6% disapproval rate from July 17 to February 18, and in 18 there have been no disapproved regulations. I will say the changes also increased the workload at the department and the workload of my division in particular. So some of the steps, but recognizing that timeliness and quality need to go hand in hand, some of the steps that the department is implementing to try and address the efficiency of the process and get the regs moving at a faster clip. One of the things that we are examining is sort of the levels of staffing is one of the options that we're examining. Another one is regulation development. I don't know if you know this, but it's a collaborative effort. It's an effort between your staff at the board, our staff at legal, budget staff in our budget office. Ultimately, agency staff is reviewing these things. So it is a collaborative effort. One thing that I think we were seeing is as state government turnover and experiencing those types of things in our ranks was a need for more training for the staff that were developing regs. This board has a great staff that develops regulations, but we are a big department and we have a lot of folks that do developing regs. So we were seeing overall a need for additional training. So what we did was we did 3 trainings. The Legal Affairs Division spearheaded a training in November of 2017, which included attorneys from the Office of Administrative Law, attorneys from our division, folks from the Budget Office as well, the goal of which was to, if we can improve and equip the people that are writing regulation packages, hopefully we can cut down on the scrutiny on the review levels. What we found in November, some people had very basic questions. What is a regulation? Why do we care? So we did in April of this year a training that was much like, if you all have seen the Schoolhouse Rock, How a Bill Becomes a Law, it was kind of like that for regulations. And it was more of a higher level. Why do we care? What are we, why is this important? And then we followed that up the following month in May with a repeat of, and actually a revamp of the comprehensive training, again with OAL attorneys there, our attorneys there, budgets folks there. So we're going to offer another training in the spring. So that's training. We've also taken a look throughout the different divisions in the department that review regulations, including our own, on steps that we can cut out of the process, hopefully, to reduce duplicative reviews, but not sacrifice quality. So we've made those types of cuts. We've done some internal restructuring in the department just to cut down on the transition time for moving paper from one desk to another. We've consolidated people that work on regs into certain areas that makes a little bit more sense when it comes to moving documents like that. We are presently engaged in what we're calling an efficiency study. The department has 2 people whose full-time job right now is to review the centralized services that the department offers, including regulations and the regulations process, to ultimately take a look at the process and see are there other ways in addition to what we were doing that we can speed things up. We have presently a procurement posted for a third-party contractor to possibly contract as an expert consultant with the department, somebody hopefully that has experience in regulations process, to also take a look, work in conjunction with those 2 people I just mentioned, and offer suggestions on improvements, take a look at what other state departments are doing, that kind of a thing. Lastly, I have personally, and our department has been working with the Office of Administrative Law. We will continue to work with the Office of Administrative Law for ideas on best practices and those types of things. Again, spirit is to try and find any ways we can to squeeze out more time out of our process and refine it. Two other points along this line. The agency above us recently hired an attorney. He dedicates most of his time to reviewing regs to cut down on the time it takes at the agency level to review and turn around regs. And then lastly, we are in process of putting together a department-wide computerized reg tracking system. This department has never had one. It has had, because it's in 3 different main units, touch points in the department, they've had 3 different tracking systems, and none of them are comprehensive and perfect. So we're in the process now of speaking with a vendor. We've identified a software program that we think is going to work, and working towards basically bringing all of the DCA everybody who touches regulations from a board level and then particularly department level under one tracking system for management purposes, accountability purposes, those kinds of things. So those are some of the steps that we're doing right now to try and improve the efficiency. And now, as I mentioned, Ms. Madsen had some specific questions, and I'm happy to jump on those. And the first was the number of regulations previously rejected and approved. Please advise if any BBS regulation packages were among the rejected packages. If a BBS package was rejected, what was the reason and who rejected it? DCA, agency, or OAL? So I looked at 2017. In 2017, OAL considered a total of 55 rulemaking files that were submitted by a DCA entity. 46 of those were approved, 9 of them were disapproved. This was a 16% disapproval rate. We didn't look at what are called Section 100 regulations. We didn't look at readoptions of emergency regulations. We focused on regular rulemakings, and we focused on emergency rulemakings and certificates of compliance. By year, for the last 4 years, the number of OAL decisions on BBS packages. In 2018, OAL rendered so far has rendered 1 decision on a BBS package. In 2017, OAL rendered 2 decisions on 1 package. It disapproved that 1 package in 2017, and then it approved that package later in 2017. In 2016, OAL rendered 1 decision on a BBS package, approving it. And then in 2015, OAL rendered 4 decisions on BBS packages, but 1 of those was both disapproved and approved in the same year. So for the 2 disapproved packages that I mentioned, 1 in 2017 and 1 in 2015, in 2017, it was a package dealing with English as a second language. It was disapproved in February and then ultimately approved in August of 2017. This regulation dealt with the conditions for granting time to complete examinations to persons for whom English is a second language. The OAL disapproved it, and the grounds for OAL's disapproval, they look at a number of standards, legal sufficiency standards, and 2 of the standards that OAL disapproved for this regulation were clarity. OAL commented that the regulation was not clear and vague, and necessity. The regulation failed to justify why applicants needed to certify under penalty of perjury that English was his or her second language. So that was the grounds for that disapproval. The other one was in December of 2015. OAL disapproved the regulation amending the examination process. The grounds for OAL disapproval there were, again, clarity. The regulation was unclear for several reasons related to national examinations. And then there were procedural defects that OAL identified. One of them was the text that was submitted to OAL was not the text that was approved by the board, and the minutes of the public hearing were not complete. So those were the grounds for OAL disapproval in those 2 decisions. The next question was the number of regulations submitted by all boards and bureaus in the last fiscal year, and the fiscal year is July 1, 2017 to June 30th, 2018. And the total we had was 34. Again, with the same caveats, we didn't look at Section 100s, we didn't look at emergency readoptions. I will say that we looked at the number of OAL decisions in that period of time rather than the number that DCA submitted in that period of time. The reason we do that is because that's a finite figure that we can put our hands around. If we do date of submission, then we only have, on one end of the calendar entry year, we will miss the submission date, but we'll pick the decision date. And on the other end of the calendar year, we'll have the submission date, but we'll miss the decision date. So instead, we looked at decisions that OAL rendered in the calendar year. or in the fiscal year, excuse me. So the number of regulations approved last fiscal year was another question. Again, July 1/17 to June 30/18. Approved were 32, disapproved 2. The percentage for that fiscal year of disapproved regs was 5.8%. Again, 0 have been disapproved in 2018. And now the current status of the board's 3 regulation packages. Examination rescoring, application abandonment, APCC subsequent registration fee regulation. The current status of that is the DCA review is complete. It has been submitted to the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. That was earlier this week. And now once that review is complete, that takes about a 30-day timeline. That will be the trigger point for the board noticing it for the public comment period. The second one's contact information, application requirements, incapacitated supervisors. The current status is that I believe there were some revisions that DCA Legal supplied. Now I'm informed that the board staff may be waiting on some possible changes from one of the board's committees before moving that package forward, and I'm sure the board staff can explain that in more detail. Last one was enforcement process. The current status is that DCA completed its review of that regulation as well, and it was submitted to agency again earlier this week. And once agency's review is complete, that will be the trigger event for noticing to the public. The next question was details regarding any revisions to the current pre-review process to improve the process and when DCA anticipates implementing the revisions. I think I discussed that in a fair amount of detail earlier on, so unless you have specific questions about it, I'll rest on that. And then lastly, I think, was considering the length of time the pre-review process is currently taking, what are the DCA's plans to ensure that the board is able to fully implement 3 bills, AB 93, AB 456, and AB 2138 by the statutory effective date if they are signed by the governor. So just really quickly, those 3 bills, 2 of them have not yet been approved by the governor. AB 2138 has not yet been approved by the governor, but if it were approved, the operative date of that bill is July 1, 2020, a couple of years out, or year and a half out. AB 456 was approved by the governor on August 20th, 2018, and it looks like it has a January 1, 2019 effective date. And the last one is AB 93, again, not yet approved by the governor, but if it were approved, would have a January 1, 2019 effective date. So as far as bills that take effect on January 1 of the following year, it is very difficult to complete a rulemaking process between the time the governor approves a bill and January 1 of the following year. And as an example, there are minimum statutory required timeframes in the regulation process. The regulation process requires, at minimum, 45-day public comment period, 30-day OAL review period. Absent any reviews, absent any development, absent any board meetings, the 75-day minimum. If you were to put that in from today, if the governor were to sign today, that would leave you with about 30 days to do all the other things that I mentioned. Preparing the files, reviewing the files, upwards of at least 2 board meetings to consider text, and then to approve the filing with OAL, which have 10-day notice periods in front of them, as you all know. So it's a challenge to get regular rulemakings done between governor's signature and January. It doesn't happen very often. That said, and I think if the goal was to file on the natural, filing with OAL would need to happen November 30th for a January 1 of the following year effective date. So with that said, if the goal is to file a regulation with OAL by January 1st, I think one of the first steps that needs to be taken is to chart out what would need to happen, basically reverse engineer from January 1, 2019, what would need to happen between now and then, and plot the course of what those steps would need to look like. Supply that to all the different entities that are tasked with reviewing and approving regs. And then that would be a roadmap that folks would know to, if the goal was to hit January 1, 2019, how we would do that and where the benchmarks need to be. So that is all that I had prepared to talk about regulations, but happy to field any questions if you have them.
Thank you. And I would like to open it up for board questions. Why don't we just go around start over there? You want to start over there? Thank you,
Just
Leah.
Had a quick question. So what is the current time period that it's in your department, in the approval process, not in the making it effective process? And what is your goal?
That's a difficult question to answer, and I'm not trying to dodge the question. The reason it's a difficult question to answer is it depends a little bit on complexity of the rulemaking file. It depends on a lot of parts in between. So
If it's small and easy, and then give
Small
me
and
if it's
easy?
hard and complicated.
Yeah.
Give me the range.
Yeah, so the department, so what we're doing, we don't have firm ranges for each of the different components in the process. We have in-house goals that we are trying to measure by. But as far as an average, I don't have an average for you. Part of the objective of the computer tracking system is to be able to come up with good averages that we can have an understanding of what it takes in the legal shop, what it takes in the budget shop, what it takes at the agency level on an average. As I mentioned, we don't have perfect data presently. We have benchmark mile marker data.
What are those?
Mile marker data like when a board staff submits a regulation to the department, when it moves from from that level, it peels off and goes to a budget shop, a legal shop, and then it moves through review layers there. Then it's married back up and it removes to, so we have dates basically when they hit those things, but what we don't have is the back and forth that, we don't have comprehensively, we're improving, but is back and forth between each of those steps. So when I say it moves from board staff into legal, what's happening there, sometimes it is just, if it's a really perfect document, it's just a review. It's just a traditional review. You read it from top to bottom. It looks good, legally sufficient. You sign off and it moves on.
So are you talking days, weeks, months for something clean?
For something clean?
Clean and easy.
Yeah. So for us, we're looking at, so we have 3 levels.
Right.
Your board counsel, a supervisor, and myself. And the board councils are looking at about a week turnaround. The supervisor level, we're shooting for a 30-day turnaround. And then myself also shooting for a 30-day turnaround.
So the goal is less than 2.5 months for something quick and easy and clean.
For something quick and easy and clean, I think that would be right. I will tell you, I don't experience that very often with regulations.
It's longer.
Usually, there's back and forth between me and the board staff, between my supervisors and either the council or the board staff. So it's a rarer case that it's quick, easy, and clean once through.
It's more like a year.
Not in the legal division.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe
Okay.
overall.
Overall, yeah.
Overall, because there are several divisions that look at regulations in the department. But it's typically not a quick, easy, clean
Sure.
rulemaking file.
No, but just understanding that a quick and easy is still 2.5 months long for something that's small, quick, done well. That's a long time for something that is clean and small.
Yeah, and I think, to that point, that is one of the criteria we're looking at building into our computerized system is a designation along those lines. Maybe not quick and easy, but the idea being the same, that, having it designated as not complex, sort of medium complex, and very complex, like disciplinary guidelines and uniform standards are very complex. Just integration of them all, and building timeframes based on the complexity.
Thank you. Yeah, that's that answer. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Leah. Anyone else? Christina.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm looking at the in particularly relating to, the two packet or the three packets, that's up in DCA. And I am interested in knowing, because one of them is already, been up there for about over a year. So when do you anticipate that it's going to be able to move along, given, all the complexity and all the hard work you guys do, and to make sure that it's, close to be approved?
Thank you for the question. I would say two things about that. In looking through the board's meeting materials, there is a chart in there of timelines, and it has what I mentioned earlier as major mile markers. But one of the things that is not clear from that is there is interaction that happens in between those major mile markers. Interaction from attorneys to other attorneys, interaction between budgets and attorneys, interaction between attorneys and board staff that's not reflected in some of these major mile markers. But to answer your question directly, it has moved on to, I believe, which one did you ask about specifically? All three of them. Yeah. So two of them have moved to the agency above the department. And agency, again, usually takes about a 30-day review period. And then they will, at that moment, be noticed, or at that time, it's the trigger moment to be noticed to the public for comment period. So, and then the other one, I think, is on hold, awaiting possible comments or revisions from the Portability Committee. I'm not positive, but I believe that's where the other one is. Please.
I can jump in on that one. So that's the reg package that's has to do with application requirements. And so what comes out of the Portability Committee will affect application requirements for out-of-state applicants. So we are holding on to that until we see what comes out of the committee.
Right. Yeah, and the intent was, we assumed that would have been already part of the regulations by now, but because of the delay, we're having to hold it. And if I recall correctly, was that the one where the comments were to change interns to associates? Is that package that we got, or is it the other one? Because it'd been there so long that the law changed. Do you recall off the top of your head?
I'm not sure off the top of my head if
Okay.
that's the one.
Okay. So,
Peter?
There were
Oh, I'm
some,
sorry.
there was some other feedback on that one. That may have been
Yeah.
part of it.
yeah. Okay. So, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it, because it's been really, I'm not the only EO frustrated by the process, obviously. So one of the questions I had asked was the number of regulations that were rejected, and you gave the 22%. And that's the number that I continue to hear. So what does that 22% equal? Because you had to have a number to get that.
That was between, I think you're talking about between January of 20.
Well, it was cited as the reason that we had to go to the new pre-review process, that there was a high number of regulation DCA packages that were rejected.
Yeah, so
Yeah, so what is what number lines up with 22%? 10, 12?
I don't know exactly off the top of my head.
I believe at one meeting, we were told 6
6 what?
packages were rejected.
No, I'm fairly confident it's more than 6.
That'd be great.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to email you that figure.
That'd be great, and then I can share it with my members.
That'd be fine.
And I want to, I know statutorily, OAL and DOF and agency, if I'm not mistaken, they all have about 30 days to review. DOF and OAL can review concurrently if we're bunching up against that line. Prior DCA exec EO meetings, we've asked for timelines. I know that you're working on it. I participated in a survey the other day about timelines. Our enforcement regulation disciplinary guidelines had been with DCA, and how many times had you asked where they were, Roseanne? Do you want to give a timeline of that?
I followed up with DCA monthly between September, every month, in September 2017 and January 2018. It was told that it was.
And subsequent calls to our attorney counsel, it was off my desk, but it's somewhere. And maybe coincidence or not, but the day that I sent the email with the questions, a few hours later, that package came back to our office. And Roseanne returned it promptly, but the 6th?
I received the edits on August 30th, returned it after business.
Yeah. So, and then today we heard that it's an agency, but had you been notified it had been gone over to agency?
No.
Okay. So, from my perspective, we're held to a standard, performance measures. I have to report our stats. I have to look for efficiencies, process improvements, continuous, to try to respond to our stakeholder needs. I also have to go before the legislature, 4 years if I'm lucky, and say, here's what we're doing, here's how we're doing it. I'm held to standards, and yet we still don't have a reasonable expectation of the timeline to allow DCA Legal to complete its review so that I can build in a plan accounting for the 45-day comment period, the 30-day review, so that I can meet the statutory deadlines. My biggest concern with our enforcement package is that we submitted that based on our prior experience. The reg process typically is taking a year from the time you publicly notice it till completion. And right now, we've been in well over a year. I have not publicly noticed this package, nor have I publicly noticed any of those packages. And under the current review process, it's really adding time rather than helping us. And so it's starting to become a barrier. And really would like to hear how you talked about resources, you've talked about a contract for a subject matter expert. I haven't heard, and Dr. Brew had asked about timelines, I haven't heard any specific hardcore deadlines or reasonable expectations in terms of once it gets to legal, what can I expect given that it needs to go through 3 attorneys?
Yeah, and I think I did mention when I was responding to Member Brew's question that presently what we're looking for is a week turnaround for the board council. We're looking at a 30-day turnaround for our assistants.
Okay.
And then I'm also shooting for a week turnaround.
Okay.
Strike that. I'm shooting for a 30-day turnaround as well.
Okay.
I will tell you that, with 40 programs, that is, and with the level of scrutiny and rigor that we're giving our files now, that is an aggressive timeline with as things stand. So we are working to meet those. We've set those as goals, and I think it will be telling as we are able to implement our computer tracking system what the real timelines are. Again, I would say that there is back and forth that happens that's not always reflected in some of the paperwork that I see. And I will acknowledge that part of the change was a sea change, I think, that happened in September of 2016 in the way this department did its process. Wasn't entirely known at that point in time, some of the implications workload-wise. So we're looking at that too.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate, because these are the first packages that have been submitted under the new process. My biggest concern is AB 2138. That is huge, and I'm going to be one of 40 that need to submit regulations, that need statute change, and if they're not implemented in time, I can't do things that I'm not allowed to do in law. The other challenge is I can't revise any regulations that are currently in the process. So I have a strong concern that we're not going to meet the deadline, and that because the delays that are already occurring with my disciplinary guidelines, that's going to be affected. Do I hold that package now and just wait? Because that was and in that package that's currently waiting, it's the sexual orientation change efforts that we're addressing, and the requirement to have people take the law and ethics as part of a probation term. And so if I have to hold that package, then it's impacting the way we protect consumers, and that's a real strong concern.
Yeah, understood. And I think we have every desire, and we are keenly aware of AB 2138 and have every desire to be on par in implementing before or by the effective date, the operative date.
Okay, so just to kind of back up, so based on you talked about a 30-day review with you, a 30-day review with assistant counsel, maybe a week, we can say 2 weeks for counsel. So if we do 90 days in legal, and then I add in the 60 days for OAL and DOF, and then the 45-day comment period, that's 150, so I'm at about 6 months. So if those timelines are adhered to, then we should reasonably expect it would take a year, as it did previously, correct, to get a reg package all the way through?
I don't know. I guess you did some quicker math than me. I think the part of the reason that we made the process changes was because due to the disapprovals, we have front-loaded a lot of the work that was happening at the tail end of the process. What used to happen was a lot of the review that is now happening at the first set of time periods wouldn't happen until after the notice to comment period. And sometimes we would get packages, final packages submitted, ready for submission to OAL a day or two before the 1-year deadline expired. And what that caused then is if that was not a good package, the only option was a disapproval. And that increased. So part of the goal of the changes was to add more scrutiny and review to the front end so that when you get to the back end, you have plenty of runway if changes need to be made. And usually, if changes don't need to be made, that back end review is a faster time frame because it doesn't require the heavy writing into the initial documents and development of the initial documents that is required on the front end. And as you know, you can't change those front end documents once they're noticed to the public. You're stuck with them. So one of the things that one of the natural things that happened was we added. There is more time now on the front end because the rigor of the review is more on the front end. Also rigorous on the tail end. I don't want to suggest that, but because it's a simpler process on the tail end, it takes less time. So I'm not sure that that's a hard and fast answer, but that is sort of the consequence of the change that happened.
Understood. So then I guess my, with respect to the 2 packages that we had disapproved, one was informally, it was the exam, I believe, and it was primarily the language, and we actually, staff went in and we met with OAL to get the language. And the same was true for the ESL. It was language. It wasn't the ISOR or the 399 or any of the other technical stuff. Our experience has been that that's been beneficial to speak with OAL because at the end of the day, that's the attorney that says yes or no. And I'm wondering if there has been any consideration or discussion to include OAL in the pre-review process, not for an approval, but just to look at the language, because I think the training that is provided in the regulation training, probably sufficiently addresses what an ISOR needs to have, what a 399, which is a financial document. Sorry, I'm speaking Greek. I'm sorry, guys. So, just to get a sense of whether that language is going to address some basic concerns.
Yeah. So a couple of things. The OAL disapprovals, they were formal decisions of disapproval. They did tackle both the text and necessity issues that were in some of, at least one of them did, in some of the initial documents. As for collaborating with OAL, we do that particularly where we have a question. So sometimes you read the text of a legislation or you read the text of a regulation, and you know the impacts. It's pretty clear on its face, and that's, I think, the goal. Other times, it's not exactly clear on its face, and even from the attorney who, like you say, is not going to be approving or disapproving it at the end of the day, I'm not sure. And so oftentimes what we might do is we might email the OAL attorneys and say, this is a question that we have. We're not sure what the answer is, but if you were reviewing it, what would you say the answer is? And that will be instructive in how we move a package forward.
Okay, so it's more on an as-needed basis, not upfront in the whole process.
And that might be something that comes out of our efficiency study as a suggestion that, hey, let's do that on a regular basis. I suspect that might have OAL impacts if that were the
I'm
case.
sure it would, yeah.
So I don't know at this point, but as we see things and as things look unclear to us, we do that reach out.
Okay.
Peter?
Thank you. And thank you for coming here and give us the answer. And, you know, your description of the process is pretty clear to me. But I just wonder if you have a flow chart for transparency purposes, you know, to describe exactly what you were saying so everyone can see it. And also in your efficient study, I assume you will identify the bottleneck or have a critical path analysis if you have such a flow chart.
Do have a flow chart that I'm happy to supply to Ms. Madsen, and she can circulate too if she doesn't have it already. I think we've passed it out at other events at DCA. Also, I would anticipate something along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
Is that the flow chart that was submitted in the sunset response?
I believe it was.
Okay, I have it.
I have mostly a question of procedure. So if we have a situation like we might risk to having a bill that is being implemented, but we didn't have sufficient time to legislate internally or regulate, so who's going to be made accountable for that? Because at a certain point we have cases where all of a sudden we are we are supposed to apply the new law, but we don't have it with us, and it's not fully implemented. So that becomes a huge liability for the department, for this board, for our staff. So I wonder how we navigate. Hopefully we don't get that, but it seems like it's really risky. We're really close. So I wonder what is going to happen if that occurs.
I can't implement.
Okay.
I can't implement. To do so would be doing what is referred to as an underground reg.
Of course.
And that's illegal.
That's what I thought,
Yeah.
yeah. But then there is a gap, right? Because all of a sudden we don't have the tools to implement the new law, but it's there. So we will have to respond to consumers and to the public scrutiny to see exactly what happened. So I hope we don't have to get to that point, because then we have to, I'm sure people start pointing fingers about where the discrepancies are. So I'm sure everyone is concerned about that. I'm not trying to say anything by this, but it's just something that we don't want to get to the last minute. So I think that's why the board is so concerned about that, as you are, I'm sure. But
I just have one follow-up question about, because we talked about the contract and the resources. Obviously, we pay pro rata. Everybody understands pro rata, so my guess is we'll see sort of a bump in that if those go through.
I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's too preliminary even at this point to give an answer on that question. Yeah, so.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. Yeah. So we're moving on. We're moving on now. Thank you. And this is
Pro rata.
Mr. Taylor Schick.
Yes.
Thank you. Welcome. And thank you for coming in to talk to us about the pro rata.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Taylor Schick, and I'm the Fiscal Officer for the Department of Consumer Affairs. I'm here to talk about our distributed cost report that goes out to the legislature every July 1st. To give you a little bit of context, the department is completely funded by all the boards and bureaus that it oversees and provides services to. So every year, the budget office has the task of distributing the entire cost of the department across all the boards and bureaus underneath the department. We do that through a variety of methodologies that break out those costs. That should have been included in the packet as it was included in the letter. If you would like, I could go over those methodologies, but at a very high level, for units where we have very clear workload metrics, division of investigation, we have caseload hours, Office of Information Services, we have widget counts on their databases, the call center, we have call volume. What we do is we do a workload-based analysis, which we take the prior year workload and we use those workload ratios to develop costs into the next year. What I'm always doing is I'm distributing the cost for the next fiscal year. So right now, my staff are in the process of working at what the department's budget is for 2019-20 and what our distributed cost will look like for all the boards and bureaus going forward in that year. To continue back onto the methodologies for programs that don't have a direct workload widget, a lot of them happen to be within our administrative sector, which could be Office of Human Resources, our Executive Office, Equal Employment, Budgets, Accounting. For those sort of sectors, we distribute costs based on authorized position ratio for the department. So whatever this board's ratio of staff is to the totality of all staff for all boards and bureaus, we use that ratio to distribute those costs. So that's a very high-level explanation of those costs. There's no shying away from it. The department is fairly large. We have a significant cost, and so I'm sure you've all seen this lovely spreadsheet, and I do apologize for the size. This is going out to the legislature, and it's supposed to report figures at those high-level units that I've described. Those are all the columns. Those are all of our divisions that have different methodologies. But I also have to tell them the story for all of our 46 different funds that we are directly impacting. So that's why that document is sort of very hard to read. So if it would be beneficial, I could always break it down into a different format that makes it a little bit easier to digest, and I can always provide that to Kim if that would be your preference, so you can see exactly what the units are and how much this board is paying for each unit. That is something I can provide a little bit more detail of. That being said, this chart works left to right, so it's every single program. I do detail what your authorized staff were for 2018-19. This is the costs that we built last fiscal year for the current fiscal year that we're in. And then we have the cost for every single unit. And then at the very end, I have the percentage breakdown, because a lot of programs want to know, of my total budget, what percentage of my budget goes to support the department. And so that is that final column. And for the Board of Behavioral Science, that percentage is roughly 26%. The average across the department is roughly 22%. But to give you a little bit of context, that value will fluctuate fairly significantly based on the program and what services they receive from the department. So we have programs that are very heavy users of our call center. So as a result, they'll have a higher ratio of call volume. And there are other programs that really utilize our division of investigation a lot. So they'll have a higher share and volume of our investigative costs. So typically programs that are utilizing more services from the department will have a higher percentage of their budget that is directed to DCA, where some programs, they might have their own IT systems, they may have their own sworn peace officers and their own investigative units. They'll pay a much lower percentage because they're already handling some of those services in-house. That's my very high-level spiel. I'm open to any questions. I know it's a complex issue, and I know some of the amounts on that spreadsheet are very small, so if you need to have me provide this in another form, as I mentioned, I can always provide that, and I can come back to answer questions at that time as well. Sure.
So my question is that, BBS is a little higher compared to the other boards with a similar size and authorized position. So what are the services that, that BBS has been using that cause the pro rata rate to go higher?
So probably, so if we're looking, the first column, which unfortunately is named AISD less OAS, and what that just means is that's our Administrative and Information Services Division less the Office of Information Services. That column should align directly to your position count. So every program should be paying roughly their exact percentage for that unit. Where things get to go off a little off track is when we start looking at your specific Office of Information Services costs. The Board of Behavioral Science is on Breeze. As a result, we have about 18 boards that are currently on Breeze. Those programs are going to have a little bit of higher percentage of pro rata costs because they're paying for the cost of the new Breeze system. Additionally, behavioral science also is one of the utilizers of our Division of Investigation. So you'll also notice that not every program utilizes our Division of Investigation. So that's one of the other factors that would cause the board to actually pay a little bit higher of a percentage.
And because we're moving, our pro rata is going to go up. Sorry, guys. So, rent increase.
Any further questions from the board? Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
I think we would appreciate perhaps having this in a little bit more legible format.
So what I'll have to do there, I know this is sort of a good document if you want to do a comparison purpose against other programs. Unfortunately, I can't provide that information on a one-page document without
All right.
having it at that size. But if you want specifics just for the board, I can provide that on a little bit larger of a format. And so you can really nail down sort of which unit and how much of the board's budget is directed towards that unit, whether it's Office of Information Services or Division of Investigation.
Thank you. That way.
Would
we
it be
can follow
helpful,
up a little bit.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, would it be helpful if we had a few other boards and bureaus that were similar size to compare it to? 'Cause
Would that be possible?
Is that, I
could
don't
do a
know.
little exercise to sort of explain to your question.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
when you're looking at, Board of Accountancy. I mean, I know you're around 60 authorized staff. Board of Accountancy is 90 to 100, but Board of Accountancy doesn't utilize. They're not on Breeze. They actually have some of their own IT work in house because they have some of their own systems. So they pay certain costs a little bit less because they're not utilizing the department as much, and then they have a lower usage of our Division of Investigation. But what I could do is I could pull out about 4 programs and sort of compare and contrast why some might be higher than you and why some might be lower.
I think that would be very helpful.
Sure.
Yeah. Any other questions from board members?
And the board members did all get that publication from DCA about what the services that are included in all of this. So I hope that if there's any questions about that, let me know.
We did.
Okay.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to Karen Nelson. Thank you for coming in.
First, thank you for having us. Good morning, everyone. Karen Nelson, Assistant Deputy Director with Boredom Bureau Services with DCA. For the newer members, wanted to just provide a brief overview of what our office does. We are your liaison to the department, and so you'll be seeing me a whole lot. You probably have met our Deputy Director, Christopher Destrio, at a previous meeting, and so as Boredom Bureau Services, we are to provide service to you all, and some of the activities that we are involved in that you may be familiar with are the Director's Quarterly Meetings, licensing and enforcement work groups, which we've actually had recently conversations with the board. Looking at your board materials, there seemed to be a decrease in your timelines for licensing, and so that specific work group looks at best practices, and perhaps we can start a dialogue in which we can identify some things that your board may do that other boards and bureaus do not do, and to share that throughout the entire department. That would be great. We also help out with the board member orientation training, and so with the newer board members, we do have one coming up on Tuesday, which I do believe board member Kim will be attending, and so we'll make sure to provide those dates also later for the other 2 members who do need to do that training as well. And we also provide support with a future leadership development program, which actually just launched its 2nd cohort this week, and wanted to acknowledge Ms. Madsen, Executive Officer Madsen, for participating and continuing her support in that program and looking at the emerging leaders in the department. She has served as a mentor for 2 consecutive years, so we wanted to acknowledge you for that. Thank you. So today I'll be providing a brief update on the Executive Officer's Salary Study. So the department has awarded the contract and have met with the consultants to kick off the project this week. From start to finish, we do expect the project to take approximately 6 months with an estimated completion date of early 2019. The contractors will be expected to provide a comprehensive independent review and assessment of board executive officer salary levels and evaluate changes that have occurred subsequent to the previous salary study that was conducted in 2011. This new study will assess the programmatic changes that have occurred over the years and how these changes have increased the operational complexity of our boards in the department. This study will help us determine the degree to which these changes will support compensation augmentation. And some of the goals that the department would like to focus on through the salary study are first, synthesizing the data and collect information to evaluate the salary bands of DCA programs and make determinations on how the data may or may not suggest an augmentation of the program's level. Secondly, determine what critical factors are used to support compensation increases in exempt position review process. Thirdly, evaluate the gender parity for EO salaries across DCA programs. And lastly, benchmark comparable positions comparable to other EOs in other states. And that's kind of the brief synopsis of where we are in the salary study. And as I mentioned, we hope to see that study completed about March 2019. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? Leah?
When you said you'll evaluate gender parity, are you evaluating the gender of the actual person in the position or the gender of how that field is dominated? Like some fields are more male and some are more female dominated.
That's a wonderful question, and I can look into how that is written into the scope of the project. I don't have it right in front of me, but I'm happy to take a look at how those differences may be put into play in the salary study.
Yeah, because if there's a way to look at both, I think the numbers may not be parallel.
Christine?
Thank you. I was wondering, when you say you're going to look at other states, are you going to look at comparable states like New York? I mean, you're not going to look at Montana or something like that, you know, where the cost of living is much, much less.
Sure, and not having the scope in front of me, I do have a brief kind of outline of what we were looking at, but I can take a look to see what other states would be compared to the study as it relates to California.
Thank you.
Christina?
Just a quick question. So are you doing the study in-house or with the outside consultant?
It's an outside independent consultant.
And so after you have, you know, the recommendation, what will be the next step?
Take a look at what it is as a whole and perhaps look at what their recommended next steps would be. And then I'm happy to report after the completion of this study what will come of it.
Peter?
Thank you for coming here. What is the level of detail will the consultant look at? What I'm asking is, are they going to look at all the EOs as an aggregate, you know, or they break down each board or commissions, the size of the board in terms of compensation comparing to a similar board in other state?
With other states, so in looking at the totality of the department, we will look at the EOs, the size, and the complexity of the overall board and the makeup of it. About the other states, I'm not certain how that comparable will be. I would imagine it would be the same, but again, not having the exact work plan here in front of me, it's hard to say distinctly what that would be.
But what you're saying that they're not going to look at the average of all the boards for us, but they will look at each board individually based on the size of the clients and so on, right?
Yes, it wouldn't be the average of all the boards. It would be taking a look at all of our boards and EOs and the different programs, sizes, and again, the complexities of each of those different.
They will look at each board individually.
Correct.
Thank you.
I have a question, observation. Thank you. Thanks for being here. So the first question is how the study, I mean, I think I have an idea, but how the study came about, because I think it's not new to anyone that this board has expressed a lot of frustrations when it came to evaluating our own EO and the lack of clarity and explanation from the DCA in relations to a lot of questions that we asked. So I'm actually very happy to see this, but I would like to know a little bit like what triggered the study, because I didn't hear that in
Sure, and I believe it was feedback from our EOs and our different programs. The previous study did not garner the outcome or the results that really took a larger picture of our boards and bureaus. And this one, we did gather feedback from our EOs across the DCA boards and bureaus, and together collaborated with the scope and what it would look like, and really took at the overall picture as opposed to, I believe the previous study looked at a subset. And I think, Mr. Chu, that's what you were mentioning earlier about whether it's an average or just a bigger picture, and it is the latter, the bigger picture.
Okay, and then I'm definitely, I speak for myself here. I'm definitely looking forward to see this because in a few instances, I think it was very, I didn't, I'm trying to find, for lack of a better word, I really didn't trust the process of how DCA approached our evaluations in the past and how was frustrating not to having clear answers. I know in the past we had other members of DCA come in trying to navigate through that, but at the end of the day, we had sent several evaluations that they were rejected. I know this is not the time to go over any one of them, but I'm looking forward to see the process even after the evaluations of the study, because I want to make sure that there are actions taken in lieu of what we find out. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And as I mentioned, with the anticipated completion of the project being early 2019, I'm happy to, if Executive Officer Manson would like to put this back on the agenda, we're happy to come back and provide updates.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. Dr.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have another question. Will the consultant look at the private industry with similar qualifications, how much they compensate for that particular person?
Private industry, I don't recall seeing that, but I can double check. I don't believe so.
Okay, but my point is that if, in general, I believe that the private industry would pay more. So if you go into the competitive market, qualify people, I would speculate that they would work for private industry instead of working for the state. If we only compensate the state EO at a certain rate. What I'm saying is that, they should be relatively competitive. They should have relatively competitive compensation for state service versus, the private industry.
Thank you for your comment, but I do believe we're looking at state.
Yeah.
I think Peter makes a comment, and I think it's something we've talked about at the meetings, was that, if you want to recruit the best and the brightest, you need to have a competitive salary.
Sure.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of EO vacancies recently, and when I look at the salaries, I'm like, well, good luck. But yeah,
and that may be a bigger problem than I think specific to necessarily EOs and probably beyond the scope. So I do appreciate the fact that you're going to get back to us in early 2019. It sounds like it'll be very valuable information, and I'm really glad that you're taking this on. Anyone else on the board have any comments?
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Kim, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? No. All right, thank you. So, oh, it is that time already. So we will take a short 10-minute break and reconvene at 10:30. Well, okay, we'll take a little bit longer break then. We'll go to 10:30. Let's just make it even. We'll be back at 10:30. Yeah.